This episode discusses fertility treatments, miscarriage, grief, and acceptance. It's an incredibly powerful conversation, but if these topics feel like too much for you to hear right now, please revisit this episode when you're ready.
We're all imperfect, and on this podcast, I'll be chatting with a variety of interesting people who are willing to make themselves vulnerable by sharing their own struggles and imperfections.
If anyone is listening to this and can relate, there is a reason for you to be here. And I'm so grateful that you are here. And my experience is if you can cling on through that very dark time, you will discover something beautiful on the other side of it. And it could be that all you discover is that you have the capacity to survive it. But you can't be going on adventures, growing, taking chances, acquiring wisdom if you're not here to do that.
I'm Hugh Van Kylenberg from the Resilience Project.
And I'm Ryan Shelton from My Mum.
And I'm Josh from Hugh's mum.
And this is The Imperfects.
This is a big one. This is a really big one. Elizabeth Day from the How to Fail podcast, a huge podcast, specifically in the UK, very popular over here in Australia. We cannot believe that she joined us for the podcast. It was such a thrill.
What a wonderful, wonderful person. God, that was cool.
Speaking of failures, can I run one by you that happened to me last night?
Always.
Yep.
Always. You know, I have an open door policy when it comes to your failures.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And just a small social failure that I just wonder had been, which I just wonder if you know about this already. So you know your partner Jam.
Me? Yes. Yeah, I do know Jam really well. A bit better than you, actually. I think I met her before you met her. Yeah. Jam.
So we went to the National last night. Our podcast team went to the National. Not George. George didn't come because we forgot to tell him we had a ticket for him.
Yep.
So everyone except for George came, and everyone's partners as well. And we had wonderful seats. We were right up the front, and we were standing up there.
For those who don't know, the National are a band.
Yes, at the Sydney Mime Music Bowl in Melbourne. Lovely night, 30 degrees, and sold out crowd. Wonderful night. And just in the excitement of, I don't know, being at a gig and everything was happening. So you went off, Ryan, to get a drink for us all.
Yeah.
And so I was then standing next.
I'm glad you included that part of the story. Josh was with me as well, to be honest. But yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But I went off and paid the drinks for all.
Yeah.
No, I remember that. That was cool.
So you guys went to get drinks, and then because you'd gone, I was then standing next to Jam. And we sort of looked at each other, and she reached out to like go, hey, and sort of give me a hug. And for some reason, I sort of leant over and hugged her with one arm, and then I very passionately kissed her on top of her head.
Oh.
Like her dad.
It was a bit like that. It was really strange.
How did Jam react? She did not tell me this.
How did Penny react?
Penny was engaged in the music, thankfully. I just don't know. It was one of the strangest things I've ever done in my life.
But if you think about what were you thinking in that moment? Because we've all done like really awkward things. Like, what am I doing? But what were you thinking?
I was thinking, overwhelming love for Jam is what I was thinking.
It's not what I was hoping you'd say. To be honest, I was just thinking, I like Jam way more than I thought, and I know she's with you and my wife's here, but I'm truly in love with Jam. That's what I was thinking. Oh, cool. Thanks for the honesty.
You appreciate it, honestly, don't you?
Yeah, that's really kind of you to share that. Thanks for sharing. Fucking dickhead.
I'll reword that. I was thinking...
Nah, why would you? Absolutely came out beautifully. So eloquent. Yeah. Overwhelming love for Jam. I know what you mean. Yes. Yeah, I know what you mean.
I thought we were going to stand side by side and have our arms around each other for a second, but she kind of leant in to for more of a hug.
Gee,
and I was like,
what the?
This is a little fun one for you.
Literally before we started recording, I said, Hugh, have you got anything you want to talk about? He goes, oh yeah, a little funny thing that happened last night. Little mini affair that I engaged with your partner.
You'll love this, actually.
Yeah, you'll love this. This is hilarious. It's right up your alley. Classic betrayal.
No, so when I say she turned towards me to go, oh, hi. We haven't really said hi yet because it was very early in the gig.
You certainly made up for lost time.
No, so when I actually turned towards her, she was like, I think we'll do a hug. And I was like, but then I also thought, no, we already hugged, so maybe, I don't know, I'll kiss her on top of the head.
Yeah, so you didn't know what to do with all your passionate energy.
Yes.
That I have to put this somewhere.
Poor Jam is just trying to say, hey.
Yeah, like a friend.
Yeah, kissed on the head for him.
But you were so taken by your overwhelming love for Jam, your words, that you had to put that passionate energy, or that, actually passionate love somewhere. And you decided, actually, it's probably, as far as like, if you're going to put it anywhere, top of her head seems like a pretty good compromise.
Pretty good result for everyone.
Considering. God, thank God you're in a public place. Far out.
It was so public.
Well, luckily Jam has overwhelming love for you as well, which worries me, to be honest now, but she would have absolutely loved your showing of love, I'm sure.
You'll have to ask her about it because I don't know how she interpreted the whole proceeding, but it happened.
Yeah,
it happened.
It surely did happen. Smart of you to bring it up with me on the podcast so I can't react in the way that I would have if it was like, hey, mate, can we catch up for a beer? Something weird happened at the National.
I have to talk to you about something.
Just bring it up as a funny anecdote from last night. But sorry to stick on this, but it's my life you're talking about. So did Jam think it was weird? Like, was there a weird reaction between the two of you, or is it just passed?
We both played it pretty cool, but I think we were both in shock.
So
what just happened.
So there was no acknowledgement with Jam that was a weird moment.
It was too loud. I couldn't go, I just kissed you on the head. Like, I couldn't say that.
Yeah,
would have had to yell it and then.
So it just flew by as an awkward moment.
Yeah.
So if I see her when I see her tonight, and I say like, hey, did Hugh kiss you last night? She'll have to say yes.
Yeah, she will. Otherwise, she's lying.
Right.
Anyway.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that, Hugh.
It was a great night, though.
Yeah, it was.
Wonderful night.
It was great. Now that's what I'll remember from it. I'll never go and get you I actually was only getting you a drink. I literally got 3 waters and an alcohol-free beer for you. That's literally all I got.
What an opportunist.
Wow. Okay. Let's get to Elizabeth Day. That's what everyone's really here for.
Yes.
Although it's nice to squeeze in a scandal just before the interview.
Actually, before we do that, I reckon we should clarify it because I reckon you could sound like a bit of a creep.
Like Hugh.
Hugh in that story.
Fair.
I think it's probably for people who don't know your relationship with Jam, but you guys are like very good friends, and it's not unusual to give her a kiss on the cheek, I would assume.
Yes. No,
absolutely. No, for sure. Yeah, that's a good point, Josh.
It's because not the weird bit is not that you lurched onto her and kissed her. It's the fact that you went for the top of the head.
Yes, I don't think people should run around kissing people willy-nilly on the top of the head.
Yeah, I mean, we'll hear from Jam in her press conference later today, but but essentially for now, it's so true.
Okay.
Elizabeth Day, what a woman. As you'll sort of hear, like this was supposed to just be like an interview, like these sorts of classic original interviews we do with people where they are vulnerable about their life. But what we sort of discovered, as you'll probably realise throughout, is this sort of becomes another one of our episode formats, the Academy of Imperfection, because she's just so intelligent about everything. So,
Speaks very vulnerably about her infertility journey. And it's some of the stuff she says I've never really heard before as far as the way people discuss infertility and when to stop. And what she's doing now that's really helped her. She's in such a great place, and she's obviously done things that have really helped her to get to that place, and she talks about them very vulnerably. And I mean, she's a podcaster. She's very articulate, so we think you're going to absolutely love this.
I feel like whenever we have a guest with an accent, it legitimizes us just a little bit more.
Absolutely.
I feel that. I 100% feel that.
Yeah, it's exciting when there's an overseas guest. It just feels like, wow, we must be a real show.
Well, we're joined today by Elizabeth Day, who is, failure royalty.
I'm so kind. I wish now I could put on a comedy accent. After that build-up, but I think that would be incorrect on multiple levels, so I won't.
Well, you did not that the Northern Irish accent is a comedy accent, but you did spend a lot of time growing up in Northern Ireland.
I actually, I can do a Northern Irish accent. Is that what you're about to ask?
Yeah.
Okay. I can only say specific things. I can say, I know where you live. I know where your family lives.
Whoa.
Threatening.
So I can give threats in a Northern Irish accent. It's quite a niche skill.
Is it? It feels like saying those phrases in a Northern Irish accent is quite threatening, but I feel like if you said it in a Scottish accent, it would be quite friendly. Like,
Do you want to give that a go?
God. Okay. Okay.
Scottish.
Yeah. Right. Okay. I know where your family lives. I know. What was the other one?
I know where you live. I know where your family lives.
I know where you live. I know where your family lives.
You're so right. That's nice.
I once did like a voiceover session years ago, and it was an Irish or Scottish accent, and the person running the session said, the Irish accent is in the back of the throat and the Scottish is in the front of the nose. That is a way to differentiate them.
Front of the nose?
Well, I mean, you're not speaking through your nose, but it's like, you put the voice in the front of your mouth or nose sort of thing. Yeah.
Love.
Anyway.
Yeah, anyway.
Well, having failed to do accents, this is a seamless link. It is so
Perfect.
lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. I love what you three do, and it's a real joy to be chatting to you.
So Ryan and I share the same manager, and she called me this morning, and I have never in my life heard her so excited by anything. She adores you, and everyone does. You're humongous.
Am I?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the only time that as a woman I've loved being described as humongous.
Yeah, it's a risky comment. That's for
First
sure.
of all, I love your manager. Clearly, keep a hold of her.
Yes.
'cause she's
No.
got great taste.
She's great. She's great.
So I usually do like a bit of a bio, but I sort of, what are you? Like you are, what, yeah, can I ask
Yes.
you, can
Great
you explain?
question.
Because like you're a writer and a podcaster, like extremely successful in everything you've touched, you've been very, very good at. But how do you describe yourself?
It's a great question. And it's so interesting because I don't feel that I have been really good and successful at everything that I've ever touched. It's just that, as you will know from this podcast, when we present ourselves out in an outward-facing manner, when we compile our professional CVs, we focus on the high points in the same way as we might do on an Instagram feed. And it's human nature to choose not to focus on the difficult moments and the moments of failure and imperfection. And that's why I'm so relieved and happy to find myself in this space where we all flip that notion on its head. So that's the caveat to what I'm about to say. And what I am, I'm someone who started out with a passion for writing. So I write books. I've written 9 books. And that passion comes about because I love stories. I love telling stories, and I love connecting with other people. And so I started out by connecting with other people through writing, and my background is in print journalism. And then I started writing books when I was in my late 20s. And then I went through a series of quite cataclysmic personal failures. So while my professional life on paper seemed like it was going more or less according to plan, I had a great job on a Sunday newspaper in the UK. I'd started writing the books I'd always dreamt of writing, but I had got married to the wrong person. I was in a dysfunctional relationship. I was trying and failing to have children, having unsuccessful fertility treatment. And during that time, I discovered podcasts. And I think because I was questioning the nature of what failure and success really meant, and because I felt like a failure in my personal life, and I felt so much shame attached to that, I understood at some level that the next way I wanted to tell a story was through podcasting. Because as you will know, it's this amazingly intimate form where you can open yourself up to have a different kind of conversation. So in 2018, I started a podcast called How to Fail, which came out of my own curiosity. That was literally a question I had. How do you cope with failure? How do you survive it? And I asked my guests to teach me. And the format of that podcast is that I asked each guest to come up with 3 times they failed in their life, according to them, according to their own metric. And then that would form the basis of the discussion. And that's been going now from strength to strength in a way that is deeply ironic because it's a podcast about failure. It came from my own feelings of failure, and it has become the most successful thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, what am I? I'm a bit of a paradox, but I love living in those grey spaces.
Please welcome a bit of a paradox, Elizabeth. Day.
That on a T-shirt.
So I feel like you're like How to Fail and the Imperfects both share like a sense of like humility in the title. And I know that when we started it, we called it the Imperfects. I mean, it makes contextual sense because we are talking to people about their imperfections. So there is like a real similarity. But I also did kind of like calling it the Imperfects because I have this sort of aversion to failure. And I knew that if we call it the Imperfects, then if it fails, it's like we promised it from the start.
Exactly that. It's actually so liberating.
Yeah.
Because if I ever fail or make a mistake, I can say, well, that's on brand.
Yeah. I feel like we do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting that. The other thing that kind of interests me when you said From Strength to Strength, have you read the book From Strength to Strength?
No, I've never heard of it.
It's by Arthur Brooks, I think his name is.
Oh, who did that book about character? No, that's David Brooks.
Don't know that one.
Cut this out.
Leaving in all the failures.
Random tangents, yeah.
No, he wrote a book called From Strength to Strength, and it's essentially finding meaning and success in the second half of your life. And it's Oprah approved. She loves it.
Say.
You have to say that. But it's interesting. It plays a lot with the idea of, he talks a lot about what he calls like strivers. And a striver is someone who is essentially addicted to success and terrified of failure. When you talk to people, or what you've learned essentially about failure, have you also learned things about success at the same time?
Hugely. First of all, I'm going to seek out that book because I love the idea of finding your power in the second act of your life, because my experience has absolutely been that the more you live, the more wisdom you hopefully accumulate. And you always learn more from the things that go wrong rather than the things that flow seamlessly from success to success. And I think doing How to Fail and having these conversations has completely transformed how I feel about success and what it means to me. Because I think I grew up with a very conventional notion of what success was. And it was very attached to the idea of productivity, to working really hard, to having a sort of 5-year career plan where I would set certain goals for myself. And now I hate 5-year plans because what I realized was that I was doing them wrong. I was setting my goals so sky high that when I got to that 5-year point, I would feel like a failure according to my own metric because I hadn't achieved everything that I thought I wanted to. It's a bit like someone saying, I'm going to run a marathon next week, and they've never even taken out their running shoes to go for a jog. That was the disconnect that I had. But I was encouraged by a culture that celebrates productivity and success and aspiration and extroversion and striving. And so I think I was putting myself under a lot of pressure that didn't enable me to be myself. I didn't really know who I was. And therefore, if you don't know who you are, you can't make informed decisions from your own place of authenticity. And now I realize that success for me is being able to understand myself and to show up as myself. So in every area of my life, I believe that I am being my authentic self. Whether it's recording a podcast, whether it's chatting with you three lovely gentlemen, whether it's stroking my cat at home with my husband, watching an episode of Maths, whether it's writing books, whether it's in my friendships, I no longer feel as though I'm wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that so many people struggle with, that idea that we are not enough, that we have to pretend to be better. And that idea that we find ourselves in cultures, particularly in corporate cultures, where there's only one way to be and you're not allowed to show your vulnerability at your desk at work because that's seen wrongly as weakness. And now, happily, I've created, somewhat unwittingly, this life for myself and this space for myself where I can be vulnerable and I can share that. And other people feel, I hope, less alone as a consequence because they've had experience of the same vulnerability. And that all comes together to create this phenomenal power and strength. Because I truly believe, as I'm sure you do, that vulnerability is the source of real strength. And I think now that's what success means to me.
Oh, God, I love it when we have podcasters on the show.
I don't feel like I need to say anything. I feel like we could just we'll turn our microphones off and we'll just
Go get a cup of coffee.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There was something in what you said earlier that I thought when you were talking about the way we present ourselves in a format like this or in a job interview or something where you put up a veil of, I guess, perfection or trying to show your highlights. But for me, for most of my life, adult life anyway, that's been a really hard thing to do because the consistent narrative that I say to myself is only looking at the failures and all the deficits and all the places that I see myself as a failure and that I assume everyone else does. Have you found that to be, am I alone, or do you think that is universal in everyone? Or like what presence, and do you think that, does anyone not have that internal voice?
It's a great question. So obviously we exist in a world that is also peopled by psychopaths and narcissists. Yeah. And I'm sure that there are some people who, for whatever reason, don't self-reflect and have quite a shallow capacity for introspection.
Yeah.
However, the vast majority of us will have that internal voice. We'll have that inner critic who is constantly pointing out the things that have gone wrong, that you've done wrong, and who is turning that into an excuse for self-loathing. So many of us feel like imposters in our own lives. And that kind of feeling thrives in silence. And one of the functions of shame and fear and stigma is to keep us silent. Because actually, when we choose to speak up, we realize that other people feel the same. And that's the source of such tremendous power that there are lots of people and corporations and structures that don't want us to feel that.
Yeah.
But my experience has been when I have shared something that feels to me like a uniquely personal failure. So when I started speaking up about my fertility issues and writing about it, that felt like a scary thing to do and a very personal thing to do. And I was almost doing it because I wanted to make sense of it to myself. That sharing has been one of the greatest gifts of my life, because actually suddenly there was this whole wave of people who had had the same or similar experience, who had never felt able to talk about it because of that misplaced sense of shame or stigma. Yeah. And who felt like, oh, here's someone else expressing this and I want to connect with you and communicate with you. And so that's the gift that keeps on giving, because none of us now feels alone because we've decided to share. And I think that's what I would say to anyone who feels like they're a unique and neurotic and messed up failure and no one else is. We live in a culture where we're constantly comparing our insides, that feeling of insecurity and neurotic dysfunction, with everyone else's outsides, especially because of the rise of social media and things like Instagram. And I can open Instagram one day and feel terrible about myself and see a perfectly curated image of Kim Kardashian on the beach in Costa Rica. And she looks fantastic. And I've got a lot of time for Kim Kardashian, but that's a different podcast.
I don't know. I feel like we should get into that as well.
We can totally get into that, because actually it does kind of feed into what we're talking about. But that image of curated perfection, if you're not in the right headspace that day, can really make you feel terrible. And so I'm just so passionate about telling people that they are not alone.
On that, I just think, I hope this isn't a lazy question, but like, how are you imperfect?
Oh, there are no such thing. There's never a lazy question. There's just a lazy answer.
And I don't mean that by like, I see you as a perfect person, but
Why not? That's how I took it. That's how I received it. Well, I can't believe you're retracting the compliment.
Well, I think people would see, you as like so successful. But obviously, as we know, we're all imperfect.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm interested because I think it is so, it's so connecting for people to know.
Yes.
And I'm genuinely interested in how you are imperfect.
I suppose it goes back to that internal voice that you were talking about. I have been through really dark times in my life. I've had very low patches of feeling like perhaps it would be easier if I weren't here. I think I've always had a tendency towards anxiety and melancholy in a way that I have made friends with now, because I believe that life is texture and it isn't about the single-minded pursuit of superficial happiness. It's actually about feeling everything and understanding that no feeling is final, as Rilke said, that everything passes. It's like the weather, and there will one day be blue sky again, especially here in Melbourne. But I think that there are loads of things that I could tell you, and I don't know how interesting it is for other people to listen to, but I'm highly competitive and comparative, which is something I don't like in myself. It's partly because I have that historic drive. And I think that historic drive comes from a feeling that I am not lovable and I have low self-esteem that I'm aware of now. I've had therapy and I've had the joy of doing the podcast. So the first act is in observing something rather than feeling that it defines you as a person. So it's something I have rather than something I am. And I think that for many people, if they haven't felt love at formative points in their life and they don't feel that they're enough, they will look for external validation. And that's certainly been the case in my relationships, my romantic relationships, until recently. Thank goodness, I'm now married to an amazing man. But it's also been the
what's
case.
his name?
His name is Justin.
Justin.
Yeah, he's great.
I don't know why I needed to know that, but I just needed to know
and
his
it's
name.
such a good name, isn't it, Justin?
Strong name.
Yeah. And it's a second marriage for both of us, which I think, I actually think some of the best relationships can come out of the learnings from the failure of past relationships. And we certainly have that. But it's also manifested itself in how I work. I think I'm definitely guilty of placing a very high priority on always being busy and working hard and striving and striving and striving. And part of that is a need to prove myself. And part of that is a need to be the best as I see it, because that's the only way that I will get the love that I believe I need to fill the hole in my self-esteem. Now, that's dysfunctional. That's not the way to go about life. And I've done a lot of work on understanding that actually my purpose on this planet is not to try and be better than anyone else or to try and be the best according to someone else's or society's metric. It's to be the me-est version of me and to seek to maximize that. And also because a lot of what I do is about intimacy and one-on-one connections. Even though I have millions of downloads, like I'm having a one-on-one conversation with my guest and with a specific listener every time I record, as I'm sure you do. And I understand that that's actually different from being number one in the podcast charts. Like there's a different thing going on there. But that's something that historically I have struggled with and struggle with still. And the other thing, I mean, I could go on. Tell me when you want to stop.
This is incredible. I mean, I find it so fascinating and I'm always shocked whenever people talk about how they struggle. It's shocking to me.
It's such a relief to be asked. It is such a relief to come into this studio and to feel that I can take a breath and that I'm not promoting the next show I'm doing or the book, which is all wonderful. And I'm so grateful I get a chance to do that. But I can say, yeah, I feel really down and like a mess sometimes. And I get, I'm an introvert, she said. Talking on a podcast. I am actually an introvert, guys. But what that means is that I need alone time to replenish my energy and I can get quite sort of emotionally drained and a feeling of overwhelm. The other thing that I'm bad at is conflict. I'm incredibly, I can't even say it. I'm so conflict avoidant.
Oh, same.
That oh my gosh. But I think that has made me cowardly sometimes.
Okay.
Where I have probably been dishonest emotionally. If I find myself in a relationship, professional or personal, that isn't working out, first of all, I always think it's my fault. Secondly, I find it very difficult to put into words. And thirdly, I probably let it overrun and I'm probably being untruthful with myself and the other person because I'm kidding myself that I don't want to hurt them, which is actually slightly egomaniacal. And that's another thing that I've learned, that conflict avoidance, you think you're being selfless, but actually a lot of the time you're being selfish because you're not allowing the other person to know who you really are.
I find that sorry, just jump in, but it's ringing a lot of bells. I found that if I avoid conflict, I'll write that person off instead. So it's not a fair judgment of them because I haven't given them a chance to defend themselves.
Yes.
So I just have written someone off, walked away, brushed my hands off it thinking, I'm avoiding conflict, I'm avoiding pain for both of us, but I'm actually doing them a disservice.
Yes. Or sometimes the thing that I do is I can feel this distance and this conflict that I'm avoiding. And so I try and invent a narrative where the other person has done more wrong things than they actually have so that I can be righteously angry in my own head about it without expressing any of it. But just because I'm a big believer in justice and fairness, I'm trying to make it just and fair in my own head.
Yeah.
I've definitely been guilty of that in the past as well. But I think it's partly why we are drawn to having these sort of conversations because it challenges us to be open and to show up honestly. And it's definitely something that I've got so much better at.
Well, there's something really interesting in the way you said before about success for you is how much you can be you, basically. And that is directly feeds into how good you are at your job, because your job is connection with another person. And the more we can be ourselves, the stronger that connection can be. So you're obviously very good at it.
Well, and so are you three, because I feel so comfortable already talking about things that I don't normally talk about because they don't make me sound that great. And that's because I know that you're showing up as yourselves. And that's such a beautiful thing. And I know that if I'm asking someone to open up about vulnerable, often scary or tragic parts of their lives, I need to be willing to share that space and to make them feel that I'm doing the same. And that's a really beautiful thing. So thank you.
Thank you.
So many questions. So you mentioned before, you just said there were points in your journey where you kind of felt like it would be better if you weren't here. Do you feel comfortable explaining where those moments or feelings showed up in your life?
Yes, it's completely fine. And thank you for the sensitive phrasing of that question. I want to preface this by saying I've never had what I would think of as suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts. I think it was a period of my life, and I can be very specific about it. I was in my dysfunctional first marriage, which was a difficult place to show up as myself. For various reasons, I felt like the most important thing in that relationship was trying to be perfect and trying to be what I thought of as the perfect partner, and never giving space to my own needs because I thought that would take away from the other person. And actually, that's a very small space to squash yourself into. And it didn't feel that safe. And during that time, that's when I discovered that I had fertility issues. And I started going through IVF, and it felt extraordinarily lonely. And that's a red flag. If you're in a relationship and you're going through fertility treatment and it feels lonely, that's a sign that all is not well. But it did feel incredibly lonely. And I had 2 back-to-back rounds of IVF that failed. And because at that point, it was the sort of 5-year plan point, I was putting so much pressure on myself to succeed in the conventional way. It felt like such a devastating failure that my body wasn't doing this thing that I thought was a biological imperative for a certain kind of woman. And left, right, and centre, loads of my peers were having babies without there being any issue. My ex-husband had children from a previous relationship, so there was that as well. So I felt like a failure. I was pumped full of hormones, and as anyone who's ever done fertility treatment will know, those hormones have a huge effect on your mental health. The effect it had on me was numbing. I didn't realise that it had an effect, and I almost didn't allow it. I didn't allow myself to admit that it was having an effect. And later that same year, I got pregnant naturally, which was a complete surprise out of the blue. And I ended up having a miscarriage at 3 months. So it got to the stage where we had seen the heartbeat, and then the heartbeat disappeared. And then I had quite a traumatic miscarriage where I was in hospital over the weekend. And that had all happened in 1 year. So after that miscarriage, I didn't know how I felt, but I was pumped full of all sorts of hormones. I felt very detached from the experience of what I'd been through, but I knew at some level there was something that wasn't right. And it was at that point that I remember like walking through London and thinking, what would happen if I crossed the road now and I was run over by a car? What would happen? Would that be easier? And yeah, it felt like maybe it would be easier for other people if I wasn't here, which makes me incredibly sad to look back on, because if anyone is listening to this and can relate, there is a reason for you to be here. And I'm so grateful that you are here. And my experience is, if you can cling on through that very dark time, you will discover something beautiful on the other side of it. And it could be that all you discover is that you have the capacity to survive it. But you can't be going on adventures, growing, taking chances, acquiring wisdom if you're not here to do that. And that's as severe as it got for me. But I never went to the extent of taking any action. And I'm really grateful for that. I can now look back on it and understand that I was depressed. But at the time, it didn't feel like that. And that's probably the scariest thing about it. It just feels like that's you. So I'm very grateful to have got through that period of time. And I've never felt that again.
Thanks for that.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing.
No,
Because
it's a pleasure.
it's so beautifully articulated that you don't often hear that. Thank you.
Oh,
Can I
thank
ask
you.
us something specific about that?
Yes.
When, and I thank you so much for the generosity in which you said it, but there's something I wanted to ask about when you're going through something like that. And did you have people who you loved, as you said, other people were having children? How did you reconcile the feeling of someone else who you loved having a child? Were you, I'm just going to take a punt that you weren't able to be as happy as you would have wanted to be for them? Or how did that, or am I wrong in that judgment?
No, you're not
or?
wrong. I, weirdly, I think I always felt, it's not that I was unadulteratedly happy for them, but whenever I met my friends' babies, I would think, oh yes, that's your child, not mine. Like I have my own journey.
Yeah.
And so I was able to distinguish between my experience and theirs. But where it felt overwhelming was, it felt to me like culture as a whole was fetishizing motherhood specifically. And so we're talking about, 2014. It felt like it was really at its zenith, the mumfluencer, the mum blogger.
Yeah.
And that felt something that didn't even marginalize my experience. It just completely silenced it. It felt like there was no one talking about IVF or miscarriage at that time. It's not that long ago, but I remember going to a bookshop trying to find a book that would tell me what to expect from IVF, and there was nothing. It was just like mother and baby books, shelf upon shelf upon shelf. And that made me feel, first of all, sad, then angry. I was really angry about it for a long time. And now I'm not angry with it anymore, but I can observe it. So it was more that. It was more the sort of cultural mass rather than individual friends.
When we were trying to have our first child, we had 2 miscarriages.
I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. It was earlier in the stage than what you're talking about. It was a couple of months in. And on the second one, we went on, I had going to a music festival with my mates for it was a Bucks thing. And so in the afternoon as I was leaving, my wife was like, something's not right. And I was like, are you sure I'll stay? She's like, no, I think it'll be okay. You go. I left, got to the music festival, and then got a phone call from her saying this hasn't worked out. This is definitely not right. She was insistent that I stay because it was hours and hours and hours away. And I remember, and I'd had a few drinks and with this big group of, there's about 15 guys, and I just couldn't not say what had happened. Like I couldn't hide it. So I told a couple of them, and I couldn't believe how many of them it had happened to. And about of the 15, I reckon probably 10 of them who are closer friends knew, and maybe 6 or 7 of them it had happened to. And my immediate thought was, why the fuck hasn't anyone talked about this? Like, why is this the first time I'm hearing? Because we'd already had one and gone through it in silence and felt that feeling of utter failure. And it felt like that to me. I can't imagine what it felt like to Soph, my wife. But my main shock was like, why the hell is no one talking about this?
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for sharing it as a man, because it's a very different experience to go through as a male partner. And it's so complex and comes with so many challenges, because whilst it's not happening to you physically, it's happening to you emotionally. And my understanding now, I've had 2 more miscarriages since, with my husband now, and he is so present and wonderful. And so he and I have spoken about it. It's so difficult seeing your loved one go through such pain.
Yeah.
And Justin would say, but it's not my pain to mourn, because it feels like you have to focus on your partner.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that leaves a lot of men who have experienced fertility issues with this unacknowledged grief that can be so toxic if left unacknowledged and left in a place of denial. And I'm so glad that you were brave enough to tell your friends and that they showed up in that way. But you're completely right. Still, I mean, it's much more talked about now, and I'm so grateful for that. But I found out once I started like writing about infertility and talking about it on the podcast. So I wasn't even doing it one-on-one in my friendship group. I was like, I know what I'll do. I'll write a book about it to tell everyone how I feel.
Feel safer.
Yeah, exactly. It does. So many people spoke to me, members of my family, really close friends. They had never, ever told anyone other than their partner sometimes that they had gone through this traumatic experience. And actually, you were kind enough to say, oh, our miscarriages were earlier, but ultimately there is no timestamp that is appropriate to mitigate this kind of grief. Because as soon as you see that positive line on a pregnancy test, you start building a story around that pregnancy. You start building a dream, a narrative, you think about names. And once you've gone through, you will know this, one miscarriage, you try to stop yourself from doing that the next time, but you can't, because actually it's part of the human motivation. Like it's part of what makes
that's why you're
pregnancy.
doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you're mourning, when you miscarry, you're mourning an absence. You're mourning an absence of that dream, as well as mourning that child. And for so long, because there was nothing to show for it, I felt like I wasn't allowed to grieve. I felt like it was self-indulgent to express it as grief. And that's what we're dealing with. That's the cultural conversation that we need to have.
Yeah, and you're totally right, because as a man in that role, you're mourning that. It's the same grief that you're mourning, but I feel like the last thing I want to do is go, well, I'm like,
yes,
I don't want to layer my grief on top of the person who's having to deal with the actual physical. It's tricky to find the language to get this right, but the physical trauma and the sense of failure as a woman. And it feels like it would be self-indulgent to then go, well, it's like I've just got to suck this up and support this person at the moment.
And I want to say, if anyone is going through this right now, that actually when Justin said to me, I feel so sad, it was a moment that brought us so much closer. And actually you're not laying that on your partner. You are saying that you are sharing their emotion and that it matters to you. And so don't worry if anyone is listening to this wondering what to do. I think my experience was I felt less alone because my partner said, I'm grieving as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful.
You've done something with this fertility journey you're on. You've done something which I don't think anyone else has really done, or you're saying you couldn't find books on this early on. Now, at the other end, you have talked about the fact that you've decided to stop.
Yes.
And I have quite a good, I've got quite a few good friends who have been through this similar thing. And I said, no one ever tells you when to stop. Your partner will never tell you when to stop. The doctors will never tell you when to stop. You made a decision to stop, and you've talked about that. And there's no, I haven't heard that anywhere else. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Really comfortable. Yeah. And it's so interesting, so much more comfortable now I've made the decision to stop, that I spent 12 years trying and failing to have a baby, and I was constantly on the verge of tears. It felt like my crying was very close to the surface, no matter what I was talking about, even if it wasn't baby related. It was the canvas upon which all my other experiences was painted. It was like having a totally separate brain. It was like I was operating with two heads, and one head was completely filled with fertility, and the other head was trying to function day to day and have a career and be a good partner and be a good friend. And it's an enormous amount of stress, emotional and physical, to put yourself under. And you're so right. Your friends are so right. No one does tell you to stop, particularly not if you're going private and doctors are invested in the fact that you're going to spend thousands and thousands of dollars at their fertility clinic. And this again is a whole other issue, and maybe one day I'll write about it. But I think there are so many peddlers in false hope in the fertility industry. And it's still a relatively cutting edge area of medicine. And there is so much that is unknown. And there are so many promises that are made. For instance, egg freezing. Egg freezing is touted to young women as if it's going to be the solution to all of their issues. And it's not, because a lot of eggs don't survive the defrosting process. That's assuming that you get enough eggs in the first place. I did egg freezing. I got 3. You should generally aim to get about sort of 17, 18 to stand any kind of chance. And actually, there's a far higher success rate if you freeze embryos, but a lot of young women don't feel in that situation. So that's just one example. And the reason I'm comfortable doing what I do now, so you are right in saying that I relatively recently made this decision to stop. So my partner and I went through an unsuccessful round of egg donation. And that was devastating because I had invested a lot of hope in that. I thought the issue was my aging eggs. I was like, okay, well, if we eliminate all of the issues one by one, and I'd had various medical procedures, operations on my womb, everything. I did everything, quote unquote, right. I took all of the drugs. It took us a year to find the donor. It was a stress unlike which I've ever experienced. The embryo was like AAA triple plus, like 10 out of 10, amazing, genetically screened, everything. Everything was in sync. I had acupuncture, the whole kit and caboodle, and it didn't work. I didn't even get pregnant. I got an email from the clinic after the 10-day wait, which is so agonizing, an email saying you're not pregnant, cease all medications. And that was a very low point in my life. Luckily, because I have a healthy relationship in place, it didn't get as low as it had done the previous time. And I went through a period of raw grief, and I didn't know what to do. I felt so confused about what the decision should be next, not just for me, but for my relationship. And I realized that I was approaching 45 and that I had only ever told myself one story about what would happen should I have a full-term pregnancy. And that story was a joyful one. It was incredibly positive. It was, this baby will make sense of the things I need to make sense of. We will have a beautiful relationship. They will have wonderful friends who come round for Sunday roasts, and I'll take them to the playground, and it'll be this unadulterated happiness. And I realized that I told myself that story rightly to get myself through a really difficult 12 years. But actually, there's another story, which is more realistic, which is that it's complicated and nuanced and requires the total commitment of your time and love. And as an older parent, there are various health things that could happen that I had sort of ignored until that point. And I found it helpful to start telling myself the constructively pessimistic story as a counterbalance. That really helped, as did the advice from a dear friend of mine to let the idea go. She said, I just think you need to let this go for a period of time. And it might just be that you let it go for 6 months and then you can pick up the idea again. But for now, in order for you to recover, you need to not be trying to have a baby. And when she said that to me, I felt relief, because I think I've been doing fertility treatment for a number of reasons. Obviously, the yearning for a child was a preeminent one. But there was also a sense that I would be letting people down if I didn't continue. And also because the medical advice was, oh no, you should give it another shot. You just keep trying and trying and trying. And I thought maybe that means that I'm not strong enough to keep trying and I'm failing in that respect. And surely I should want to be a mother enough that I just keep on keeping on. And when my friend said, just let it go, and I gave myself permission to feel what that would feel like, it felt amazing.
I feel like that's a very brave thing of your friend to say, because it feels like at that point in time, every second counts. I would imagine. So even sort of, because I can imagine the feeling of relief, but also the courage to kind of suggest, to be the one who suggests that, knowing that it might get in the way of what you want, is like, it's a good friend.
I totally agree. I love and adore her. Her name is Trinny Woodall. I know that she's got a big fan base in Australia. And the reason she could say that to me is because she went through 17 rounds of IVF. Wow. She has an amazing daughter now, Lila. But she knew the struggle. She knew it. And I knew that she knew it. And so therefore I knew that it was coming from a position of lived experience, which was, that meant I could receive it. But I think now I had understood at some level from whatever messaging I'd given myself that my purpose was to be a mother. That was the thing that guided all of my choices over the last 12 years. And one of my biggest fears, if I let that go, was, well, what's my meaning? What's my purpose on this earth? Like, I need to have something that feels like it fulfills the great privilege of being here. And I really thought about it. And my partner, Justin, was like, maybe you want to do charity work. I was like, yes, I think that maybe I do. And then slowly it struck me that maybe my purpose is not to be a mother and to speak to those people who have not been able to be parents despite their best efforts. Because your friends are right. There isn't anyone else, I don't think, doing that. I certainly haven't found someone. I found people who are happily child-free, who have decided never to try and have a baby. Or I've heard from people who've gone through terrible struggles and have ended up with their children in one way or the other. And I want to be that voice for those people who were me, feeling fearful, lost, confused. And I want to tell you that there is hope and peace on the other side. That something this seismic, which will always cause me sadness, always, but I can be at peace with that. And I have grown so much from it. And I feel like I've entered this phase where I feel so creative. And ultimately, that's what parenting is. That's what conception is. It is the ultimate act of creation. And I have freed up this headspace now that I'm no longer pursuing that dream. And suddenly I just feel like creative again. And I'm writing a new novel and I'm doing shows at the Sydney Opera House and Hamer Hall in Melbourne. And I'm feeling so aligned with my purpose. And it's a revelation.
Beautiful.
It's just, it's amazing because, and I certainly don't want to make this about me at all. This is not the time. But I'm
going to.
But watch this.
Less of a question, more of an observation about me. No, I'm kidding.
Just give me a tight 10.
I'm kidding.
So my partner and I, we've been talking for like the last couple of years about whether or not we will choose to even try to have a child and be parents. And I think we probably get closer and closer to the decision of choosing not to try. And I think there was an experiment we did, or like an exercise we did, and in many ways we are still trying to figure it out. But there was an exercise that a previous guest of ours, Anne Davidman, talks about doing and recommends, which is to spend 5 days assuming that you are having a child in like 9 months. So imagine that, like, okay, here comes the kid, and and you see how you feel in those 5 days, and then you spend 5 days thinking that you are not, and see how they compare. And it was really, really powerful. But when we were spending the time thinking about a life where we weren't having a child, it was almost like an invitation or a liberation to be able to think about what the next part of your life will be.
That is so beautiful. An invitation. That's so true.
And it really reminded me, it resonated with me when you talked about sort of thinking about what's next. And if you're not going to be a mother, and if it means your feeling of what your purpose is changes. And I'll just be really interested, and you sort of touched on it, but how this new life, now that you've sort of made the decision to stop, and I know it's relatively fresh still, so certainly don't want to like pry too much, but I'm really interested from my own personal, because I'm 42 and I'm sort of now in the sort of second half, technically, I guess.
You have great skin, can I just say?
There
is not a single wrinkle. I don't know whether it's the beautiful lighting in this podcast studio, but...
Well, Josh did do the lighting, so that's very likely.
Continue, sorry, I just had to say that.
This is like, honestly, this is having kids, not having kids.
Yes, actually, that's a good You look great too, by the way.
No, I don't, because I have kids, and then...
No, it's not. It's not that, because I'll show you a photo of my mother.
Okay.
And you'll see why I look like how I do.
No, sorry, I keep interrupting.
But then it's... You know, the dad bod thing, that's not men going, oh, I'm going to get lazy, I don't care anymore. It's like, that's what lack of sleep.
Yeah.
We see what happens to someone when they have a lack of sleep to their body, to their skin.
So you're saying, Hugh, that me without children, you'd like my body instead of yours? Is that what you're saying?
I'd love your body.
That's a lie. That's a lie. We've all seen your body. It's extremely good.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
This is not a turn I expected. Very quick turn to Hugh's body.
Hugh,
I was about to ask you to take your t-shirts off. I was like, no, that's where have we wandered? It's because I just,
Hugh's the only one who'll be happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
I'm curious to know, like, if you've put much thought into, and I know you talk about charity and doing charity and talking and telling your story, which is just so powerful, and that is more than enough. But even just from like a day-to-day point, and because that is what I think about a lot, and I do compare my uncertain future with everyone else's uncertain future. And of course, I assume that all my friends who have kids will have this incredibly beautiful, poetic life with their children and families, and it would just be incredible. And of course, we don't know that, but that's of course what we assume. We assume the best in others and the worst for ourselves often. But yeah, what do you think about when you think about your future, I guess?
Yeah.
Which is different than what you, I guess, hoped your future would be.
It's such a profound question. And thank you for sharing that exercise, which I think is so powerful. One of the things that I have realized as a result of the decision that I've made is that when you are trying for a baby and it's not working, you constantly have to make decisions in a limbo where one thing might happen, but the other thing might also happen. So you're constantly having to second guess yourself. And you're constantly having to think, oh, well, I won't commit to that life-changing opportunity to go to Australia because I might be pregnant and the long-haul flight won't, like, I'll feel uncomfortable on a long-haul flight. And then it gets to that point and you're not pregnant. You're like, well, I've just wasted that time. I don't have to ask those ambivalent questions anymore. That in and of itself is huge. And suddenly I have just more time. And I've made really proactive decisions with what to do with that time. So one thing that I've decided to do is like just spend more time writing. Like, my life is busy and full and I'm thrilled, but I want to commit to 1 week a month where I go somewhere to write. And I can do that because I'm not the mother of a baby and my partner and I can travel and we can make that decision. And that's been a really big part of it. One of the things that I struggled with, and I wonder if you're feeling this too, is that fear of existential loneliness at the end of your life.
Yep.
Because when you have children, no matter if they are utterly awful, at least you've at least two things. They probably will be there on your deathbed. Or you will at least have left a lasting legacy on this planet. And I really struggled with that idea that everyone I loved would die and that I'd be this batty old woman that no one wanted to be friends with. And that felt so scary to me.
Well, yes, that is something I definitely think about. But I have seen, so one of my big sort of learnings, epiphanies, and in that book I mentioned, From Strength to Strength, which I'm rereading at the moment, so it's sort of fresh in my head at the moment, is sort of shifting. It's like the importance of relationships. And I know you've spoken about friendships, you've written about friendships and the importance of those. But I heard someone say you can still have a family, but they're just not biological.
I could not agree more. My friends are my chosen family. I have loads of children in my life. And actually, I'm really leaning into the glamorous aunt role.
Yeah,
I've got two nieces.
I'm an uncle, but yeah.
I've got 13 godchildren. Like, I love being able to. I know. It's the
people
occupational
are lining
hazard.
up for you as a godmother now.
And it's an
There won't be
amazing
room on
role.
your
It's
deathbed.
like,
There'll be 10 people there.
great point.
You'll get kicked out.
They'll all be there for the will reading. But I've realised as well, I sat next to Elizabeth Gilbert at a dinner in London recently, and she's a personal hero of mine, writer of extraordinary nonfiction books like Eat, Pray, Love that got me through my divorce, Big Magic, all about the art of creativity, and amazing novels. And she said to me, her opening question was, what I like to ask people is, what are they excited about right now? I was like, wow, that's a great opening question. And I decided to be really honest with her. I was like, what I'm excited about is also what I've been sad about, and it's my decision not to have children. And she doesn't have children. And I confessed to her this fear of ending up on my own. And she was like, but that sounds kind of great. And I was like, oh, you're so right, Elizabeth Gilbert. I am, as mentioned before, an introvert. Like, I love time on my own. And maybe it won't feel scary. That's just what I've been conditioned to believe. And maybe you can tell us, as the two parents in the room, I discovered when I said to my close friends, oh, I'm going to let this rest. I'm not going to do any more fertility treatment. I have decided that I'm at peace with it. They were so loving and supportive. And they started opening up about some of their reservations about parenthood, which they hadn't felt able to share with me before, of course, because they were so sensitive to my plight. And that has been really extraordinary, because my understanding is when you become a parent, it's this unbelievably overwhelming thing in both positive and negative ways. Like, the love you feel is entirely all-encompassing and unique. And at the same time, the responsibility of that and the fact that you will never be able to live a life unfettered by this huge thing that you have taken on, it shapes your every waking moment. And I can imagine that you never don't worry about your children. And for someone, I worry a lot anyway. I worry about my cat so much. I have separation anxiety from my cat. And I was like, I just don't know how I would cope. Like, opening up that portal. And a lot of my friends have been generous enough to be honest with me about that and about how scary that is.
I mean, we got 3 kids under the age of 7. The best part of my morning this morning was when I got in the car by myself.
Yeah.
It was great. 10 minutes by myself without them was the best part of the day. So fun.
3 kids. That's amazing. Under the age of 7. Congratulations for being dressed, awake, present.
Yeah,
Barely awake.
Yeah, I'm present, but I'm anyway. Sorry.
And you've still got your t-shirt on, so you are dressed.
Yeah.
Interestingly, this actually feeds into something that I wrote. I had a shocking morning with myself and my kids and everything about a month ago. And I was so disappointed in myself, and just, it wasn't good. I mean, it sounds, if I tell the whole story, it's probably not that bad, but to me it was monumental failure. And I was inspired by you, because I was listening to a bit of your show, preparing for this. And so I wrote this sort of 3-page thing called How I Fail.
You sent that to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, God, it really, because we're brothers.
Oh my gosh,
yes.
you're brothers. I'm so excited.
And I sent that to you at the time. And I wanted, because I basically had a bit of a meltdown in the morning. I was trying to be the best possible version of myself. I got up early. I don't usually get up. I'm not a morning person. I got up early just because I'd woken up. I'm like, no, I'm going to get up and nail this. And I made these, I spent so much effort to make these savory pastry things for everyone for breakfast. Had that done. It was all going well. And I'm like, I'm going to get to work earlier than Bridget, who's sitting behind the curtain, because she's just the most incredible person to work with. She's phenomenal. Doesn't have kids, so she has.
Should we keep this bit in, Bridge, or do you want to cut this bit out? Sorry, work it out later.
Shout out to Bridget, who also was wearing a lovely black linen dress today. So I just want to give props to her style too.
So do you want to keep that in or not? That bit as well. We'll work it out later. Yeah, that's fine. So George is back there as well. George is great.
George also, I haven't actually physically met you yet, George, but I understand that you are a hero.
Well, he's wearing shorts, and he doesn't often wear shorts.
Okay.
So.
I feel like he may have washed his hair. It looked particularly nice.
Did you wash your hair, George?
I thought so. Looked beautiful this morning, George. And I thought, no, this is going to be the day that I get there before Bridge and put in, because I always feel like I'm not doing enough at work. And I feel like I'm not doing enough at home, and I'm getting out there. I'm like, I'm going to get out the door. And then Charlie, my oldest, needed to go he was on the toilet, and he wanted me to wipe his bottom. And I was like, I I got it. And he was yelling out for me. And so it's like, it's okay. I know she knows the stress I was under. And she's like, I've got it. You just go. But then he started to get upset. And this whole internal dialogue of like, what are you doing? You're letting your child down to get to work 5 minutes earlier. Just go in there and do it. And so I went in there and helped him. And he just looked so helpless when I got in there. And I'm like, I've got to help him. Then my other one, August, started calling out for me and wanted to play with me. But I was starting to, blood pressure was building. I'm like, I've got to fucking get out the door. Couldn't find my backpack. I needed my backpack because it was going to be like 40 degrees and I needed shorts to ride and pants and couldn't find that. And it was frustrating. I was like, where's the fucking backpack? Then I went to realize it was in the car, came back in and the 18-month-old just wanted me to play with him. And I was just thinking to myself, you're not engaging with him. You're a terrible parent. All you're focused on is getting a backpack and getting to work 5 minutes earlier. And you've got the people that mean the most to you. You're not giving the time that they need. And this whole dialogue of like in 20 years' time, you would give everything to just spend a minute with this child.
Poor thing.
And you're ignoring it to get to work 5 minutes early. And so I tried to play with him, but then stress kicked in. I went into the bathroom and we've got a rickety old, we're at the house. And as I get in there, I'm like pulling the mirror aside and it's like when I'm in this stressed thing, I look at our bathroom. I'm like, God, my friends have got amazing bathrooms. This is a piece of shit. The thing, and Soph's hairbrush fell out, and I grabbed it and threw it across the bathroom, and it smashed and broke. And then I was like, oh God, and I tried to like yell out to the family in a pleasant way, so to offset the violent sound. Everyone knows what it's like when someone else is losing it, and you feel this like, oh God, I got to stay out of the way. And then I'm like, your 18-month-old would have felt that throughout the house. So you've probably caused a minor trauma to him, even though he was in the other end of the house. Went back into the 4-month-old who was still in the toilet to help him. And then Soph was like,
I was about to say, how many kids do you have? I've lost track of how many kids you have.
Yeah, sorry, you said 4-month-old, 4-year-old.
I was like, very well-developed kid, like on the toilet, on his own, 4 months. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, thanks. And he was, and I finally finished up there and Soph came and it's like, did you just break my hairbrush? And I was like, yeah, I did. I'm so sorry. I should say during this, she said a very profound thing because she was like, what is wrong with you? Because I was like huffing and puffing around the house and I explained how stressed I am and I just feel like I'm letting everyone down. And she said, I think that's just being a parent in the modern age, is feeling like you let everyone down at every point, which is so profound and exactly what it feels like. And that's the reason why I'm telling this story.
Okay, thank you so much for telling that story.
Yeah. Sorry,
I can feel
very self-indulgent.
No, it wasn't at all. It's actually super generous. I feel the stress. Like I felt that. And the one thing that came across so loud and clear is that you put yourself under so much pressure. And I'm sure that that's something that comes with being a parent, where you're constantly evaluating what impact this one thing might have or might not have when they're like 25 and looking back and in talking to their therapist being like, oh, when he broke the hairbrush. And that must be such a weight to carry. But what I want to say is my best friend is a psychotherapist, Emma, which is an incredible combination to have in one person. And she has raised 2 extraordinary children. I love them so much. They're 2 of my godchildren. They call me Auntie Liz, and it's a very special relationship. And she once said to me that a parent's job is not to insulate their child from all of the difficulties and stress in life. It's to show up as yourself and to show them what the messy complexity of being human is. As long as you're there, loving them and able to explain what happened at some level, that's fine, because that will help them evolve and regulate their own emotions. And I thought that was amazing because I think so many of us seek to make life perfect for the people that we love. And actually all that you're doing is then ensuring that you can't be your authentic self. And that is not loving. Ironically, actually being yourself, unless you are a horrible person, which you're not, being yourself is one of the most generous things you can give a loved one.
I need to ask, we have we've interviewed a woman a few times called Layla Stone, who's this incredible sort of parenting and just expert at life. And she talks about the power of apologising and explaining when something like that happens. My problem is I don't know how to apologise to an 18-month-old who can't speak. How do you do that?
I think you should do it anyway, though.
Yeah, I do actually do it.
Because at some level it will go in. Yeah.
Yeah, I assume it will go in at some point.
And you get used to doing it, which means that when they are old enough to completely understand where it's coming from, that feels familiar and safe. And then they know how to do it. And that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely right. But to a long-winded answer to your question before, it's the best thing in my life, but I feel constant pressure that I'm not doing it well enough.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about something you said before? Both stories where you talked about the low points, you said, I feel like I'm letting people down. Who are the people?
Wow. That is a question that goes to the very heart of who I am, I think.
We got there.
Yeah, wow.
Before you came in, we said, let's get to the very heart of who she is. Let's make sure we do that before she leaves.
So impressed. Who are the people? I once had a therapist who referred to them as the shitty committee, which I think is such a good phrase, because obviously there's the people that I know and love in my life. So I definitely think I had a very strong fear of letting my parents down, because my parents expected a lot from us, gave us a lot of opportunities, and are highly intelligent and successful people in their own right. And so I knew that I wanted them to be proud of me. And so often we seek out our parents' pride in place of love. Like, actually what we want is love and wholesale acceptance. But what I did was set up a dynamic where I only felt I was going to get love if I performed to a certain level. And I carried that dynamic into all sorts of other relationships. And it just so happened that with this mindset, I ended up doing well at school. And then it becomes this sort of dysfunctional cycle where you are getting praise or good grades or validation from your teacher. And you're like, well, that feels nice. So I'm going to carry on doing that, without ever realizing that it doesn't last and that there are no exams you can take in adulthood to prove that you're doing it right. But I still had that mindset. And so the other people were key relationships in my life. So parents, then it would be meaningful others, so sort of boyfriends. Not so much friends, because I'm very blessed with my friendship group in that they are the greatest, most consistent loves of my life. And Emma, my best friend, has always accepted me as I am. She's known who I am before I have. And that's a wonderful thing. But it's also people that I've never met who I can imagine having opinions of me. Wow. And I think that as my profile has grown, that's been more of a challenge because of what I do and what we do, we share and we're open about it. So we have to be out there sharing and being open, because otherwise there's no connection, there's no point to it. And there are always going to be people who have opinions of that and who have negative opinions of me, and now have a means of expressing that. When I started out in newspaper journalism, you had to write a letter and put it in an envelope and put a stamp on it and put it in a post box for it to get to me. And so there was much less visible criticism, whereas now everyone can go online, everyone can leave horrible comments on your Instagram. I'm extremely fortunate in that the vast majority of people are so nice to me and really positive about what I do and very generous in what they say. But there's always going to be that subset who criticize you, and they're also people that I worry about, because my default position is always to think I've done something wrong. And I think maybe that's quite human as well. But if someone criticizes me for something, I automatically think they must have a point. And that's actually a very destabilizing place to be if you don't have historically high self-esteem, because you're always thinking that that you have made the wrong decision in some way, or that you've hurt someone, which is the worst possible feeling. If someone's expressing anger, you're like, oh my gosh, what did I do to make them angry? So I've come up with ways of coping with that, but that is a real lifelong process for me. I worry too much about what other people think.
Do you think when you read negative comments on other people's Instagram, do you think they have a point when it's about someone else?
It depends on the context, and probably that feeds into my comparative nature, where if it's someone who I don't respect.
Oh yeah.
And it's someone, but it's someone
For
who,
example?
for example, like
No, I'm joking,
someone who I don't respect, but who's kind of got away with it, probably because they're a certain kind of person that we're culturally conditioned to believe they deserve success.
Oh, true.
And they don't deserve,
meant,
yes.
I think I meant more like people who you would see that you would respect. I should have,
Yes,
people who
no.
you think you don't.
That's
yeah.
a great point. And that's something that I know logically. But now what I do is, first of all, I leave myself a space between my feeling about something and my reaction to it, if I'm going to take any. So if I read a negative comment on Instagram, I know now to leave it 24 hours because my automatic instinct is to be defensive and upset and to reply saying, no, you've got it wrong. It was this that I meant. And I've understood that that's not a good place for me to be. And I leave it 24 hours, and generally speaking, I've got much better at metabolizing it. And after 24 hours, it doesn't bother me anywhere near as much. And I'm so glad I haven't replied.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I remind myself is that I love cheese. Okay, there's a relevance to this. I love cheese so much.
What a hook. I'm in.
Yeah. This can be like the hook for the entire podcast episode.
Yes.
This can be the clip that you use to get people to listen.
Yeah, Elizabeth Day on her cheese.
I love cheese.
Yeah.
I'm half Swiss. It's a cultural thing. I will always choose cheese over dessert, all of that. There are some people out there who hate cheese, or they might be lactose intolerant and they might never have eaten it and it brings them out in a rash. That's like opinions.
Yeah.
I can be doing something that I perceive of as cheese, as a worthy thing that I hope brings comfort to some, and others will think, oh, gross, cheese. I don't like that. And that's been really helpful for me, that there are some people who won't get it. There are some people who won't like my books because they consider my books cheese. I'm delighted that my books are cheese.
Yeah.
Or it's,
Generally loved by everyone, but there are a few people who don't.
yeah, or it's a bit like, oh, I hate your blue hair. And then like, well, I know I don't have blue hair. So I think it's actually, it's great for me. It's a good exercise for me to like believe in what I do.
It sort of reminds me we had Pat Cummins. I don't know if you follow cricket, but we had him on the podcast.
His eyes were just
Were they magnetic?
piercing.
Were they like Dan Carter? I did Dan Carter, the New Zealand rugby player recently, and he's phenomenally
What did you
handsome.
do? Don't tell Justin. Do not tell
my
Justin.
God. He actually looks quite like Justin. I had him on How to Fail, on the How to Fail.
Okay.
Yes, in person. I insisted on it.
But he I'll just skip over all that. Pat Cummins talked about how are we going to fail as a team is a discussion they have before every game, and how do we want to fail as the mindset, because we're going to fail, it's going to happen, and how do we want to do it? And I've been thinking about that so much since we've done that interview, and I think about that in the creative space of how we make the show, and it's exactly what you're talking about before. I'd rather fail doing something that is exciting to us and I feel something while we're doing it, all those kind of things, many things to measure it up against, rather than trying to round off all the edges to please everyone.
Totally.
That would be an awful way to fail, because you're going to fail in one way or another,
Exactly,
and you might
that's
go too far. Or
so true. Could not agree with my dear friend Pat more.
gorgeous Pat.
Yeah, that you would ultimately rather fail taking the risk, because if you don't take the risk, you never grow and you never go on the adventure. And you never give yourself the opportunity to evolve. And to cite another sportsman, Michael Jordan, the great basketball player, he famously said, I missed the shot 99 times out of 100. People remember the 100th shot, but the only reason I've been able to make it is because of those 99 failures.
Wow.
Can we talk about chin-ups?
Yes. Oh, is that what you call pull-ups?
Pull-ups. Can we talk about pull-ups?
100%. This is my new obsession.
Because you put on Instagram saying, not that anyone cares, and our manager screams at Instagram going, I care. I really care.
Oh my God. Again, I love your manager. What's her name?
Beck.
Beck, thank you so much for caring.
So Beck Sutherland, her name is. But so I also am obsessed with exercise, and it's like healing therapeutic superpowers that it has. So it's sort of trivial talk about chin-ups, but I think moreover what I'm saying is I just wonder exercise is like an obsession. Is it a reasonably new obsession to you? And what has it done for your journey if you draw it back to I don't want to say issues, but the journey of infertility that you've had, you're now using your body in the most incredible way. Has that been a
right
healing?
now, like in front of you? What you can't see if you're listening to this podcast is that I'm using my body in an incredible way right now.
She's
I'm doing
held
the
a
most extraordinary.
pull up for the entire interview. It's quite phenomenal. We've never seen this before, but who are we to get in the way?
Brought her own bar.
I've had to adjust the microphone, get a new tripod, but
Just dangling.
it's worth it.
I feel like I'm saying this all the time, but I love that question because it's been huge for me. So I, at school, thought I didn't like exercise because I didn't like team sport and I wasn't good at it. And because I was of that mindset of like, I don't want to do anything I'm not good at because I'm so busily trying to succeed so that I'm lovable. So I won't do any sport. And also I had that feeling of letting people down because I was on a team and I wasn't good enough. And so then in my 20s, I didn't really do any exercise whatsoever. My idea of hell was someone saying on a Sunday, let's go for a walk before lunch. I'm like, really? And then in my 30s, because I was doing this unsuccessful fertility treatment, I think subconsciously I realized that I wanted to be able to do other things with my body and to use that energy that wasn't being used to conceive a child in a way that I could be proud of my body, but also connect with it again. And I realized that I sort of lived in my head for so long. I'd been walking around in this kind of fleshy avatar that I wasn't connected to. And so I discovered spin classes, and that unlocked a whole thing for me because I loved the music and the atmosphere. And I lived in LA post-divorce, and they have amazing spin instructors there. And I loved the feeling of being in a room full of people, but being on my bike on my own. That was really great and perfect for someone who was an introvert but didn't want to feel lonely and didn't want to feel that she was letting people down. And so I got very into spin. I'm evangelical about the Peloton now. We've got a Peloton, which I'm very...
Yep.
Oh, am I amongst
Absolutely
friends?
obsessed.
Yeah.
Oh my God, thank God.
Yeah.
Who's your favourite instructor?
Well, I'm like Ben and Leanne. I really
Leanne?
love. Yeah.
Okay, they're friends.
Do you know Leanne?
Yes.
Oh my
She's
God.
She has become a dear friend of mine.
What's Leanne's surname?
Hainsby.
Yes,
Yeah.
love Leanne
She
Hainsby.
is incredible. I love Leanne so much. She was texting me yesterday, and Ben's great too, obviously. But
But they're kind of like a good yin and yang
They are.
trainer because she's obviously much more bubbly and like excited, and Ben is like much more like let's get down to business, like
Yes.
no stuffing around.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're great.
Love that. Oh my
the
God.
ride they did together,
so hilarious,
Stunning.
so hilarious. They're 2 for 1,
brilliant.
so good.
Yep.
So I got very into Peloton and yoga. That was something that I started doing when I was doing fertility treatment, and that has been so good for my mental health. And just because it's very rare that unless I did yoga or intentional exercise, I would spend all of my time in my head sort of rushing around. But doing yoga or doing the Peloton reconnects me with my body and gives me that space where I'm not doing anything else. I'm fully present in what I'm doing. Anyway, such a long answer, but I'm so passionate about it. Recently, probably again, off the back of the failed egg donation, I was like, I want to feel strong and I want to do weights and I want to find someone who will teach me how to lift weights properly. And I found this amazing PT called Luke Worthington. Shout out to Luke. And he has this technique where he breaks down every single exercise. So you think there's no way I could ever do a pull-up. And he breaks it down and he sort of quietly is like, yeah, you can. I'm like, I don't believe you, but I'm glad you have faith. And he breaks it down into small blocks of work. And so you start off doing just lifting a kettlebell. And he builds up and builds up. And it's such a lesson in consistency and self-belief and faith in the ultimate goal. But you're doing it, you're present in the exercise that you're doing without thinking, eventually I'll be able to do a pull-up. You're like in the moment. And now I can fucking do a pull-up. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but I feel like
You are.
Worth
For
it.
that you are.
I honestly could not believe it the first time I did it. And Luke was just standing there sort of quietly smiling and nodding his head because he had known all along. And I feel in the best shape of my life as a result of that. And it's an internal feeling. And the fact that I can lift heavy weights, I love the feeling of it. And I cherish my body for allowing me to do it.
Beautiful. So I feel like it's a great feeling to be getting stronger as we get older. And it's physically getting stronger, but I think it tricks your brain into going, oh, emotionally I'm getting stronger, and everything feels like everything goes along for the ride. Like you do whatever your best lift is or whatever it is. When that increases, so too does self-esteem. Everything, I feel like it all goes along for the ride, and so I feel like that's So Beck, our manager, was saying that she wants to know she's up to 4 centimeters. She can do 4 centimeters, and that's from 2 centimeters. She's getting better, but she just.
Now, Beck, I would like to know, maybe DM me on Instagram, are you using a resistance band? Because
she's just fallen off her chair, just so
okay.
you know.
Luke trained me without using a resistance band, which again seems completely unhinged, because like you can put your foot in a resistance band and it can help you. Anyway, he's got a special training technique. Beck, if you're ever in London, just come to the gym.
She will be now.
Literally in a taxi on the way to the airport. Can I just? I know you have to go. I'm just conscious of your time.
I don't want to go.
We don't want you to go either, but you have to, unfortunately. But you mentioned before we started your love of reality television.
Yes.
And I'm always like, my partner loves reality television, and I'm constantly, for such a long time, there was sort of like an element of shame to like reality television. But more and more, we're hearing about all these very accomplished, intellectually endowed people, who love like what you would otherwise call trashy TV.
Yes.
Is there, could you draw a line from your love of reality TV to the times in your life when you've struggled?
Yes. Absolutely can. Thank you for allowing me to talk about one of the great loves of my life. Obviously, there are different forms of reality TV, and I don't watch them all. But reality TV, when done well, is all about what I love. It's all about what makes us human. It's all about giving into our foibles even when we're trying not to. It's about the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, to ourselves and to other people.
So just for context, are we talking Love Island and that sort of stuff?
We're talking Love Island, we're talking Married at First Sight, we're talking my favourite reality TV franchise of all time, The Real Housewives.
Which one? Yeah. Where are you?
I've watched them all.
Wow.
Yeah,
no.
But my favourite is New York.
Wow.
Before the reboot. Anyway.
Before the reboot, of course. Yeah.
Although Salt Lake, also exceptional, and Beverly Hills, OGs. But I think with really good reality TV, well-produced reality TV, although the setup might be fake or strange or shocking, generally speaking, the emotional truth that emerges is always real in some way. Even if the reality is this person knows they're on television and so they're changing their behaviour slightly.
Yep.
But that's fascinating too.
Fascinating, yeah.
And yes, I can draw a direct line. Some of the darkest periods of my life, I honestly cannot thank the Real Housewives franchise enough for getting me through them. For 2 main reasons. One is it's a familiar comfort watch. So when the first lockdown hit in the UK during the pandemic, I rewatched all of the Real Housewives of New York from the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Because for me, are we the same?
Well, Jam, my partner, is obsessed with New York.
Oh my God, I love your partner.
And she said, you have to watch. She said, we're watching the top 10 episodes or whatever, because she desperately wanted me to get into it. And I do love it, particularly with another friend of mine, Tom. He said, watch New York like it's a sitcom.
Yes.
And it's a completely different experience. And he was so right.
Yes.
But yeah, sorry, I cut you
or
off.
Or watch it like you would read Dickens. And I mean that completely seriously. Dickens was often writing
This is Gary Dickens, not Charles.
I'm referring to Charles, but he would often write for periodical magazines. So he often wrote in that sort of sequential sitcom style, and he wrote to entertain, and he wrote multiple subplots, multiple characters, all of whom interacted to feed the beast of the deadline. And I feel like The Real Housewives has that element where, yes, there are the key players, but there's all this stuff going on underneath the surface that is completely riveting. So it's my comfort watch. But it's also where I first saw some of the things that I was experiencing on screen. The Real Housewives of OC was the first time I ever saw someone doing an IVF injection on screen. Yeah. And that was way back, way before scripted drama. And it's still, sadly, vanishingly rare in today's society that we see groups of women of a certain age who have been through a whole heap of stuff, as you all know from New York. Some of them been sent to jail. They've been through widowhood. They've been through divorce. They've been through fertility. They've been through difficult times in their families. They've been through difficult times in their friendship groups. And they have come back together, or they have survived it, and they're generally speaking in their 50s and 60s. And we don't see that on scripted TV. And I yearn for that. And I've learned so much from watching these groups of phenomenal women. And one of the main things I've learned is that you can be whatever you fucking want. You can be multiple different things and have multiple different facets, and that is part of your power. You can have an unhinged camp argument one day with your stylist, and the next day you can be showing up as the most present parent. We are allowed to be many things. So I love reality TV.
I feel like I speak on behalf of the three of us when I say our hearts are aflutter.
Yeah.
And our podcast doesn't have like a podcast girlfriend, but if your podcast is interested in dating,
it's like when Taryn's twin, like when you have like Scunthorpe that is twinned with Calais. Is that a niche British reference?
I don't know that at all.
Cut that out, Bridget. That was so boring. Are you asking me to go exclusive?
If our podcast could date or something, I don't know.
Am I your type on paper, to use Love Island lingo? I mean, the answer is obviously an unmitigated yes.
I think our podcast would be a great couple. I
totally agree.
So,
brilliant.
Anyway,
good. Wow, didn't expect a proposal as well.
Loved it.
It's a strange finish, but anyway, it's just
Been brilliant.
It's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
So much.
We love you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Well, what a woman. I mean, like, if you're not now going to Elizabeth Day's podcast or both of her podcasts and subscribing, you're mad. You're absolutely mad. Nuts and mad. You're mad nuts. She's such a wonderful person, and the energy is like continued when we stopped recording.
Yeah.
Until she walked out the door, it was like the same. No.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's so eloquent.
Yeah. And she did say afterwards that she was like keen to kind of like start a WhatsApp group with us, and we were like, oh, yeah, cool. Tried to play it cool. And then, so I'm sort of waiting around for a couple of days after we recorded, sort of thinking, I wonder when this WhatsApp group will start, waiting for protocol, and then find out that Hugh's been messaging her secretly on bloody Instagram. Like, well.
No, WhatsApp.
What? WhatsApp? I didn't know it was on WhatsApp.
I didn't start it. I did not start it.
Yeah, okay.
I did not start it. She started it. And it was because I've never done this ever to a guest before, but I gave her my book on the way out. I've never done it in.
Yeah. So she wanted to.
And I think she just wanted to say thanks for the book.
Yeah. Okay.
So she read it basically.
Can I have a look at that message thread? I'd love to sort of see. So it's just about the book?
I accidentally deleted it or something. I can't remember.
Okay, cool. I'll ask her. Get some screenshots.
She was just what a wonderful person. We loved her.
Yeah.
I do think we should. I mean, usually at this part of the episode, we sort of take away the key learnings, but we sort of felt like as the episode progressed, it was part OG, which is like our original format, which is where we hear the person's life story, but it also felt like a little bit like of Academy of Imperfection, where we have a guest lecturer teach us stuff. I felt like I heard a lot about her life, but I also learnt so much, and I don't feel totally comfortable then trying to mansplain what she said, because there's no point. She was just so, as you said, Josh, so articulate and so insightful and so generous. We kind of thought maybe the best thing to do now is just really acknowledge the people listening who are maybe on that journey, that infertility journey that she talked about, people who have struggled, people who have made the decision to stop, just like she has, and just acknowledge how that must have been for you and what you're feeling off the back of that. And I'm sure, whatever you're feeling, having listened to that, that makes sense. And we just want to say that we empathise with your journey.
It was such a privilege to hear her talk, for her to share all that with us, and to hear her talk so honestly about stuff that I just haven't heard people talk about that in that much depth before. And it makes, I think it's well said, Hugh, just to acknowledge what you're going through.
Well, it is, you do. I mean, I've spoken to a few women who have either gone through an IVF or some sort of fertility journey for a long time, and they did say that it's really hard to find people like who are modeling that experience, or who are kind of who have gone through that experience in some way, like public figures. But I think particularly with someone that I do know who tried IVF for a long time and it wasn't working. I think Elizabeth was someone that she could follow and be kind of inspired by, or at least feel comforted by in many ways, because I mean, the three of us will like never know what it's like to be a woman going through that IVF experience. But Elizabeth sure does, and so many women sure do. And it must be so nice to have, I know whenever anything I go through and I see someone else going through the same thing, it's so comforting, and you know, you're not alone in it.
Yeah. For any couples out there who are going through this right now, our thoughts are with you, because it must be incredibly tough.
So thank you very much, Elizabeth Day. My number is no, I have sent you my number a few times. So so yeah, just let me know when you want to start that that WhatsApp group, which we all agreed on, a group WhatsApp. Feel free to add us to yours, Hugh, now that you've got one going already.
Well, we'll see. No, not we'll see. We'll definitely do it.
Yeah, we'll see. What do we have to do?
Pinky promise?
Pinky promise.
Thanks, Hugh.
A very weak pinky there, haven't I?
Yeah. No, that's all right. It's actually pretty good.
Oh, thanks.
Really good pinky. Really good pinky.
Thanks, dude.
All good. Thanks for listening. See you later. See you next week.
Can I be a fascination?